My name is Arti. I've been in tech for about a decade, actually more than a decade. And I started off as an engineer, and I'm now, what am I saying? I started off as a tester, moved into product, and now I'm an engineer at Simply Business. I work mostly with React and Rails. Today's agenda is we'll do an initial code setup that hopefully you've already done, but if not, we'll just give you a couple of minutes to. We'll go into what is Storybook, look at examples that Storybook generates out of the box for you. Then we'll create our own story, and then we'll look at some of Storybook's features like background, viewports, etc. Okay, like I said, we'll do a mix of live coding, but in the interest of time, I'll show you some pre-written code. I think this way we'll get the most out of the time we have. The slides should have all the links to the code. It'll have screenshots of what it's meant to look like. And so if you're not following along by coding, don't worry, you can still get quite a bit out of it just by following along with the slides. All right. Here were the instructions that I had sent out earlier and that Julia sent you as well. Just clone this repo. If you copy paste the stuff here in yellow, you should be able to, let me get the pointer thing up here. You should be able to get the repo up and running. It's a simple create React app repo that really doesn't do much. I just created it so you had a few components to play with. Once you've done that, you will have to then also install Storybook. So get the project up and running in another terminal window and install Storybook. And the way you do that is here, npx sb, which stands for Storybook, and in it, I guess, initialize. This will take a couple of minutes, and let me, while you're doing that, also I already have it all installed. And I should be able to get this running in a second. And once you have it open, we will get started. So while that's running, let's see what happens at the end. When you finish installing Storybook, you'll see this on your terminal, and you can start running it by saying yarn Storybook. Okay, let's now get this. Sorry, let me just adjust my windows. Okay, so when you open up Storybook after you've installed it, you'll see something like this. And I have it running here. Let me just bring it. And in case you're wondering where all this comes from, because we didn't really create a button or a header or anything like that, these are not the components that you cloned from my repo. This is what Storybook gives you when you install it. But we'll take a look at that in a minute. But before that, let's see what is Storybook. So Storybook is a JavaScript tool or framework that helps you build, organize, and document your UI systems. But what does that actually mean? This is our Lonely Planet Storybook. Let's actually go to it. Here it is. And you can see right away that you have a list of all the colors they use, the fonts, typography, icons, and every component that they have. You can take a look at what they look like. Let's look at their cards. So if you're a new engineer at Lonely Planet and you have to create a new component, you can just come right here and say, oh, okay, they already have a card, a basic card, a card with a video, a card with a book, and now I've been told to create a card with, I don't know, with someone's face on it. I can probably use this and just replace this image with someone's face on it and don't have to do that much work for this thing. So super handy for that kind of stuff. And in case you're not here because you want to do engineering, but you want to be a tester or a designer or UX person, Storybook is useful for you as well. As you saw with the Lonely Planet website, you can use it for documenting your components, your typography, colors. That's useful for engineers and designers. You can see what your components look like together, individually or grouped together. And you can view components on different screen sizes, so useful for responsive testing and different device testings. You can do real-time editing of components and also accessibility testing. So really, Storybook is useful for engineers, designers, testers, SEO managers, and product managers as well. Okay, so let's dive in. If you open up your Storybook server, that should hopefully be running locally for you. You'll see a whole bunch of these stories. So we have a button story, and it shows you what the button looks like, the primary button, the secondary button, large button, small button. We also have a header, and this shows us the logged in state. Because the user is logged in, you can see it has a log out button. And for the logged out story, you can see it has two options, which is login and sign up. So let's see how they have actually done that. If you, oh, and before that, Storybook, when you install it, it creates some files for you in your repo. So it's this folder under SRC, so src/stories. This is where all those stories that we just saw are created. So you have your button component, you have the stories for the button, you have some CSS, and same thing for header and page. It also creates this folder for you called .storybook in your root of your project, and it has two config files for you, which is main.js and preview.js. We'll see how to use those files a little bit later. Okay, so this was, we saw the header story, and let's see how that was created. So if you go into your code and go to src/stories/header.js, let's just open the code here. Okay. Just so you know, today we'll be looking at two of my VS Code windows. One has this bluish border, and then one has this yellow one. And the yellow is the code we'll be writing, and the blue is the code that we already had. It's the same repo. I'm just letting you know so that you can figure out what we're looking at, and because like we're going to use the button component for our story as well. So just didn't want you to be confused about which button we're looking at. Anyway, let's look at our header component. So it's a simple React component. It's using prop types. It imports the button because you saw that the header has a button on it, and it takes in these props. And then it's a simple SVG that's rendered, which is, this is the SVG over here. And then it has the H1. We can see if we change this to full bar, hopefully, yeah. You can see that's the one that's rendering there. And then based on whether the user is logged in or not, it decides whether to show the logout button or the sign up button with the login button. So really simple component. It's also got prop types. We'll see how prop types are really important for Storybook. They're not compulsory, but you get so much more out of your stories if you use prop types. And the header prop types are the 4 props that it takes in, and then some default props for the user. Okay, so that's our header story, but let's look at our, that's our header component, and now let's look at our header stories. That's under src/stories/header.stories.js. And in the code, let's look at the code for it. So this is how you would write a story. So you would import React as usual, and then you import the header component because that's the story you're writing. And then you have this default export, which contains the metadata for your story. So here we've said we want the title to be example/header. And what that is in your Storybook, you see this is example, and then it's header. And if we change that, so if we say a new example and say my header, you will see that Storybook has a section here called new example, and then sometimes need to refresh for this. And you'll see now it's called my header, and it's moved it out of this section into this section. Yes, let me try increasing the font size. Sorry about that. Hopefully this is better. Did you mean for the code or for the browser, or both? Okay, all right. Sorry about that. hopefully you can see that better. Okay, so now the next thing we do is we tell the default, you're welcome, Julia, what component we're testing. And in this case, we're testing or writing a story for the header component. After that, we create a template. And as the name suggests, it's a basic template that then you can use to modify your stories and give it different props to make it look different. But this is just like a skeleton that it creates for you. And it takes in args, in React terms, that's props. And then based on those args, it returns your header component with those args or props. Next thing we'll do is use that template by binding it to a story we want to write. In this case, we're writing a story about a logged in user. So we say logged in, and then pass the props to it, or args. And for a logged in user, all we need is a user prop. So we pass in the user object. And then for a logged out user, we use the same template, but we don't give it a user. So we don't give it any props here. And that's what generates this logged in and logged out, logged in and logged out section for you. You can call this whatever you want. You can call this user logged in, but as long as you use the same name here and here, and then you'll see in a second, it's changed this to user logged in. So that's how you create a really simple story. Let me undo that. Okay, cool. What's next? So this is the app that you cloned. Really basic app. It really doesn't do anything, but you can later after this section, after this session, go and try to make this work. And it's a kitten rating app. It's got a few components that I've created. So you've got your logo, you've got your card, there's a title and subtitle, a header, and then we've got these buttons. So I've called it codebar button so that we don't get it mixed up with the button that Storybook built in for us in their examples. So most of this workshop we'll be using the codebar button to write our stories and add features to the stories. All right, let's see what the buttons do. So if you go in your code to src/components/codebar button and look at this file called codebarbutton.js, let's open it here. And now we're going to the yellow section because that's our code. All right, codebar button. Let's see what this does. So we've written a simple button component that does the usual importing. I've used style components for the styling. And then I've got my prop types here. Buttons have three variants, primary, ghost, and danger. By default, all buttons are primary buttons. We've got three sizes. By default, all sizes are medium. And then some CSS, really basic CSS for each of the variants. So primary is green, ghost is gray, danger is red, and then small, medium, large. And then the common CSS that I've provided as a base. So, all buttons will have a white foreground, no border, and a margin. The component that we're returning is the codebar button. We provide it with these props, so a variant prop, a size prop, a label prop, and a background color, which is optional. And then based on all these props, it will return a normal button for you. We've got our prop types here. So for each of our props, we're saying our background color is a string, size is one of these three, and variant is one of these three, and our label is a string and is required. If someone does not provide props for us, then these are the fallback props or default props that the component will use. So background color can be null because we've got our variant primary, which has the green background. And by default, all sizes are medium. And if someone doesn't provide a button label, then the button will have this label automatically called button label. So that is our button component. And let's add a story for this button component. Okay, so you should be able to, on slide 24, click on this gist and get the code for the stories. We'll go through the code. So just for the interest of time, just copy it. Julia's pasted a link in the chat. Just copy this entire code, and in your repo, create a file under src/components/codebar button, and then call it codebarbutton.stories.js. So that's in the same folder as your button was, and you'll call it almost the same thing as you call your button, but with a .stories in between. All right. So while you're doing that, let me go to my code. I have it here already, and I'm going to uncomment it. But also comment this bit out. Okay, hopefully you're ready. Let's take a look. Just like for the header, we import React, and then we import the component that we want to test, in this case, codebar button. We give it the title. Again, you can call this whatever you want. I've just called it codebar/workshop button. And you're telling it, this is the component I want to test, in this case, codebar component. We create our template here and pass whatever props or args, and it will render a default codebar button if you don't pass any args. And now we've created our 4 stories here. So we've created one for a primary button, one for a danger, a ghost, and a large button. And remember, you have to bind your template to each of them. So let's look at the primary button. We've just given it one set of props, or one prop, which is for the label. And that's because if you remember, if we go back to our button code, we have these default props, which will always default to our primary button. So we didn't have to tell it to give it the variant primary, because by default, all buttons are primary. Back to the story. For the danger button, we've just given it what variant we want, which is the danger variant. And we've given it a label that we wanted to show. And then the same thing for ghost buttons, we've said variant ghost. And then the large button, we didn't need to give it a variant, but I just wanted a large ghost button, so I said ghost, and then the size is large. So let's write one here for ourselves. So if we write export const and whatever button you want to create, I want to create a small orange button, and I'm going to bind the template to it. And now I'm going to create the actual story and say .arg. So these are the props I want to provide it. I want the background color in this case, because we don't have any variant that has a orange background. So I'm going to use our background color prop, and I'm going to say I want this to be orange. And then since we've called it small orange button, I'm going to say, size, and say small. And let's see what this does in Storybooks. If we now open Storybook, then there is nothing in there. There we go. All right. It shows us the small orange button, and you'll see it looks like a big button because the screen is zoomed in, but that's the normal button, and this is a small button. You'll see that it says button label because of our default prop that if a user doesn't provide a label, it always falls back to button label. We can change that and say label, and say small orange button. And then go back here, and it's refreshed. Cool. Let's see what we get next. Backgrounds. So Storybook comes with a default add-on called background, and sorry, not default, but a built-in add-on called a background, and it's installed out of the box. You can use this to see what your components look like against different backgrounds. So if we go in here, it's this little button at the top. And if you click that, you'll see 2 different backgrounds here, light and dark. So if you change it to dark, now all your component stories will show with a dark background. And you can already see how useful this is because your page component definitely need some reworking. If you use the dark theme, you need to change the font size, font color as well. And obviously really handy because if your app has some default background colors or themes, you can use this to test what each component will look like against those colors. And let's actually go do that. If you click on slide 28, you should get this code. If you copy all this code and then go into this file, which is .storybook/preview.js. This is one of the config files that we mentioned earlier. That file might not be completely empty. If it isn't, don't worry, just delete whatever is in there right now and replace it with this code. So let's look at what this code is. Once again, it's .storybook and preview.js. It's the file just under main.js. I have it here already, so I'm just gonna uncomment it and see what this is doing. Okay, so what we're creating here is an object called backgrounds inside the parameters that Storybook can configure for us. And we're saying, hey, for the backgrounds, I want these 3 colors, which is the default theme with this color, a shiny neon with this, and then a dark background. You can call these whatever you want. So I've just made up these names, default theme. So for example, I can call this my theme, and that's fine. You can also tell Storybook that by default, you want your theme to be whatever one of these 3. I've chosen my theme. We can just as easily change this to shiny neon. And let's see what this does for us in Storybook. There you go. This beautiful neon color is now your background theme by default, but you can also change it to my theme or a dark background and see what that looks like. Let's remove the shiny thing so that, okay, so let's go back now, and now by default, my theme will be the background one. Yeah, Matt, I like that too. Let's just see what this looks like. Yeah. All right, so that was your backgrounds for Storybook. What else do we have? Viewports. If we go into viewports here in Storybook and click on this little button here, you'll see you have 3 viewports here. So small, mobile, and you can see what it looks like. Both landscape and portrait mode. You have large mobile, and then you have a tablet. But if you wanted to test on more than one device, so on common devices like iPhones, Androids, etc., Storybook has a provision for that. And just so you know where that small mobile, large mobile, etc. is coming from, if you this is a Storybook GitHub repo, and it by default gives you what it calls, oh, let me just increase the font size, sorry, calls minimal viewports, which is, as we saw, small mobile, large mobile, and tablet. But we can also get this list, which is called initial viewports, and it has all the common devices like iPhones and then Samsungs and Nexus, etc. And the way to do that is, let me shut this as well. If we go into slide 32 and click on this gist, damn it, this is the wrong link. No, it's the right link, sorry. I should trust myself more. Yeah, that's the right link. So if you copy that code and go back to that same file where you added the backgrounds, delete whatever you had previously and paste the new code. Don't worry, the background code is still here. Just paste it and you'll see both your default backgrounds, your custom backgrounds, and you'll see this viewports code. Let's look at what the viewports code is. Let's get rid of this while you're doing that. All right, so what are we doing here? So we've imported the initial viewports from the Storybook add-on for viewports, which we just saw in GitHub. And then with the parameters, you've got your backgrounds here already, but we're now adding a new object here called viewport. And we say, hey, we want the viewports to be these viewports, so the initial viewports, and not the minimal viewports that Storybook came with by default. And when we do that and go to Storybook, now you'll see a whole long line of all those devices. So you can see what your app looks like on an iPhone 6, as well as a Pixel and any other device that's in here. But what if you are writing an app for a specific device that's not listed here? So let's say we want to create an app for a Nokia phone. Storybook can let you do that as well. So if you click on that gist again and copy this code, thanks, Julia, and again, replace whatever was in .storybook preview.js and paste this. Let's see what that does for us. First, let's look at the code. Okay, so while you're pasting it, I'm gonna get that here as well. Okay, so we still want all the other devices as well. You don't need to use all the other devices, but it's handy to have them. So I've kept those here. Then I've created an object here called custom viewports. And here I've given it a Nokia 3310. You can call this whatever you want. This one is your Nokia listing that will show up in Storybook. So I've called it Nokia Old School. I think your code calls it Nokia 3310. You can call it whatever. It's just for my app. It's just exactly what will show up in your dropdown, as you'll see in a second. And then we've said this is the width and height of a Nokia 3310, and we've provided that for it. And we then have to go to our parameters, and where it says initial viewports, we also want it to have the custom viewport that we've created. You can create more than one viewport, obviously, in the custom viewports, but I've just created one for now. If we go back here now, you will see, if you scroll right to the bottom, you'll see Nokia for my app. And let's look at maybe the header. And you can see it shows what your header will look like on a Nokia. And let's see what the logged out one looks. So you can see it's a bit crowded. So you can tell your designer that they need to create a slightly better design for Nokia phones. Okay, let's go back to this and see what's next. Oh, by the way, if you want the Nokia or your custom devices to show up first, you just need to move your initial viewports or any other viewports to the end like this. And now if we go back to Storybook, you'll see that Nokia is right at the top because you changed the order. All right. Docs and controls. So these are two more add-ons that come out of the box, and we talked about them together because they're very closely related. So to see your docs, if you open Storybook and click on Docs, you'll see your story, and you'll see all the props that you have for it. Let's look at our story. So we've got our primary button here, and we've got the label, background color, size, variant, etc. This is where the strength of prop types and default props really shines. The reason you see the small, medium, and large here, and you see these radio buttons, is because we defined our prop types. And I can show you how that will change if you don't do it. If we go back to our codebar button, and let's say from prop types, we get rid of this. Well, we don't get rid of it, but we're not very exact, and we just say, hey, our sizes should be strings, right? And then if we go back to this and just refresh the page, what did I do? All right. You'll see now the size does not have radio buttons anymore. it's just a string. You can still use it. You can say, I want this to be a small button, and it changes that, or I want this to be a large button, and it will change that. But obviously not as useful. And also your users don't know what options you have. So they might try extra small, and obviously that doesn't do anything. There's an error, but that's because it's falling back to this medium in your prop types, or rather in your default props. So it's so much nicer to have that list here so that Storybook can just automatically. Storybook is so inconsistent about what it re-renders and doesn't. All right, so you can see we've got this back. You can change the labels here, primary green button, for example, and you can then go into show code, and it will have your component code here, and you can just copy it and paste it wherever you want to use it in your app. The other thing you can do is change the color here dynamically. So let's say we want a purple button instead. You can see how it changes the code automatically here as well. And supposing I wanted, let's go to a color picker, and I wanted a primary button that was slightly darker green, and so I copy this code from here and the hex code here, and I can paste the hex code here with the hash, and it's changed. It's not that different. Let me pick something that's more obvious. Okay, let's get that color. Okay, so you can see it changes and gives you the code there automatically. So this is really handy, but obviously most of us don't know hex codes off the top of our heads, but we can add a color picker, and you can actually see it in the Storybook button that is provided. You can choose the color for the background. And so let's add some code that does this for our buttons as well. So if we go back to my slides, this is just prop types, showing you prop types and default props. All right, click on slide 40. If you click on this gist, thank you, Julia, and then go back to your codebar button stories file. So that's under src components, codebar button, and codebar button.stories.js. I know it's got the entire file there, but all that's changed is here between lines 7 and 11. We've given it, in fact, let me just go do it live rather than here. Okay, so I'm just gonna copy that from here and paste it here in the interest of time. Okay, so what we're saying here is, hey, in my prop types or archetypes Storybook, I want you to find this prop, which is background color, and I want you to give it a control. Control is just the name of the add-on, and the control I want is the color control. And once we do that, if we go back to our story, we will see that we've now got a color picker for our button. And it's much easier to use, and you get the code right away. It gives you the RGBA value as well. So that is how you would do controls. Let's just quickly take a look at it again. So just under your components, you define your archetypes, which is basically prop types. And you say this particular prop, in our case, background color, I want the control add-on, and I want it to be color. And that's all you need to do to show up the color picker. Okay. All right, my favorite add-on, accessibility. Unfortunately, this does not come out of the box. I don't know why, but it's not just the ethical thing to do, but in many places, it's the legal requirement as well to get to have accessible websites and apps. And you also get a ton of SEO benefits from it. To get this working in your Storybook installation, just run this command. You'll have to shut down your Storybook server. So this, your server that's running, just shut it down with Control-C, and then run this command, yarn add Storybook /add-on-a11y, which stands for accessibility, and then --dev to tell it that you're only running it locally. And I've already done it, so I'm not going to stop my server. And once you've kicked off that command, you can also go to the next slide and get the code that you need to modify. You can also type it out. It's just one extra line. Don't forget the comma. It's in .storybook.main.js. And under the last one in that add-ons array, if you write a comma and then add this string to it. So add storybook / add-on - ally or A11Y. Okay, so let me go and check if I've done that. Yes, I have done that. So it's this bit here. And let's see what that's done now for us. Sorry, back to the slides. You'll see a little button here to the right, top right, and let's actually see it working. You have to go back to the canvas to see it. There we go. So if you see in this drop down, there's a bunch of visual impairments that you can simulate for your app. So let's say someone has blurred vision. This is what your button would look like to them. Or let's look at a header. This is what your header would look like to them. And then let's say they had one of these visual impairments, like, I don't know how to pronounce this, achromatopsia. It's all grayed out. Let's look at our danger button, which is a red button normally. And if you have that, if you have achromatopsia, it'll just look like a ghost button to you, or more like our little orange button. So this is really handy especially if you're specifically dealing with, if your app is created for users with one of these visual impairments. The other neat thing it does is it shows you accessibility scores, if you will. To get that, just click on these 3 dots here at the top and say show add-ons. And now you see this little thing pop up here, which we saw these controls earlier. So, you can see, you can just modify it. But let me just refresh this to get back. All right, so here's our danger button. And if we go into the accessibility tab here, it says we've had 2 passes, no incomplete accessibility stuff, but we have 1 violation. And if we look here, it says element has insufficient color contrast of 3.99, and the foreground color, which is white, is not contrasting enough with the background color, which is red. And it expects 4.5 ratio, but it's only got this 399. So if you remember, we could not fix the accessibility, we could not change the font color for the buttons, but let's go and do that so that we can change this from a white on red background to something that passes our accessibility test. For this, let's go back to our button, and should be line 65-ish for all of you. This is under codebar button .js, okay, under src components codebar button.js. And where we provided all these props, let's give it another prop called color, which is our font color. And then in the style over here, let's add something for the color. So we say the CSS property color should be the color that the prop has, or that the user is given to the prop. And this is only if there is a prop available. So what this is not Storybook related, this is JavaScript for those of you who don't know. This is like an if statement, basically. It says, if this color exists, then do this part, which is assign the CSS property color with this prop that's been provided. And the same thing for background color. So if there is a background color, which is, this is the thing, then this is the CSS variable or property, and then give it this color. All right, so we've given it that there. Let's update our prop type. So we're saying we now have a color prop, and that is also a string. And we say here, string. And then we give it some default props. And just like background color, we want to say normally color is always going to be the default color, which is white, but we can change it if we want. So we give it a null color. And now if we go back to our storybook and maybe go to controls, it's not refreshed yet. Let's refresh this. Okay, now we see there is a color here. So if we change this to black and go to accessibility, you'll see we fixed the violation already. And let's say your CEO or someone in management says, no, I want this to be yellow or the font color for whatever reason. And you can play with that here. It fails accessibility again, but let's do what we did for background color, which is to add a color picker for it so that we can play around with accessibility and see what colors we can use that are as close to what your management wants, but also passes accessibility. So to add that control, we'll go back to the codebar button stories, and we'll add another line just under background color, and we'll say now for the color prop, we want another control, and we want it to be the same thing, which is color. And if we go back now, you'll see now you can play around with this and also check, okay, not good enough, so maybe needs to be slightly darker. Let's go back. Nope, still bad. And also, by the way, you can use this to, I mean, this is a really small component, so you don't really have to worry about this, but you can use this to highlight what's failing and what's passing. So like this, so you can see these two are good, but this is not good. All right. One thing I forgot to mention earlier with the docs was, you know how this shows you the description and small, medium, large. Another useful thing you can do is if you go into your prop types, so we're now in our button and we're in our prop types, you can give it a comment here. So let's say here for background color that explains what this is. So you can say this is customize button background, and if you do that and then go back here and refresh, let's go back to primary. You see here now it says customize button background. So you can use this to document different things, like, so for example, label string is, you know, it's clear enough, but doesn't really say anything meaningful. So you can say label your button here, or string, you can say this is the color of your font. And for variant, for example, if we use this same comment type here for variant, you can say something like only these variants allowed, only these variants allowed, but you can change the color and background color. And now if we go back, you can see it says here, whatever you put in your comment. So really useful way to document your stories as well. And let's see, I think that should cover most of it. Yeah, so Storybook, we just looked at docs and what else? Viewports, backgrounds, accessibility, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff like you can look at the source code for each of your components. You can do snapshot testing with it. You can create clickable prototypes with your UI components. And these are just the official add-ons. You also have a lot of community-driven ones. And that's us. And hopefully you found that useful. And if you have any questions or comments, let me know in the chat. I'm now paying attention to the chat. So that's it. Thank you. Thanks, Meena. How many years have I been coding? I've been paid to code for 2 years, but I've been coding for um, since I was in school. I did basic programming when I was in 7th standard, so that's 12, I guess. Always great. I always loved coding. What was it like in the beginning? React, I learned at my bootcamp, so 2 years ago. Thank you, everyone. The all the You have the slides, and I'll paste the link to the slides again so that if you missed it in the beginning, you'll have it. And the slides should have all the code in it, all the screenshots, links to the repo, and everything else. I'll keep the repo public, so if you need it, you can use it. All right, thank you, everyone. Sorry, how can we use it with our team? Well, you can start building it. If you have an existing app, just add Storybook to it, create a branch, add Storybook to it, and show your team what you can do with it. And yeah, get started on it. Any add-ons to use with your code editor for Storybook? No, because Storybook, so the question is any add-ons with VS Code, I guess, because that's what I use. Don't think there are any particular ones that I've noticed, and it's just basically React and JavaScript. So whatever your existing add-ons are, they will work. And yes, thank you, Julia, and thank you, Meena, as well, for your help. Okay, thanks, everyone. Bye.